Hi everybody, today we're going to talk about Revel and the integrations with QuickBooks. We're going to give you kind of a quick overview and then talk a little more in depth about each of the different integrations and how they can be used and best practices for setup.
Yeah, and so to quickly introduce ourselves, our main host today is going to be Andrew White. He's our QuickBooks specialist. He was just talking to you guys. My name is Anna Kessel. I'm going to be his co-pilot here today. So while he is presenting to you, I am just going to be here monitoring the chat and the questions. So on the right-hand side, you guys will see a little questions section. If something comes up during the webinar that you're curious about, please feel free to write a question and send it my way. I'll be looking through that. We'll do a Q&A session at the end and do our best to answer all of those questions. If we're not able to, we'll give you an email that you guys can send your questions to. So if we either didn't answer your question at the end or specifically ask you, hey, reach out to us, we'll get you that email as well. But for right now, if there are no questions, we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. So Andrew, take it away.
Thanks very much. So today, as I mentioned before, we have a little bit of an agenda. We'll do an overview, competitive comparison of what else is out there. We'll take a quick look at the roadmap and then how you can extract the greatest value from this integration. So the Revel integration is built specifically to integrate with QuickBooks Payments, QBO, QBDT, and Intuit Payroll. Now, the thought is that Intuit Payments, QBO, QBDT, and Payroll all have a whole host of third-party integrations with which they integrate. So Revel pushes your data into your QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Desktop and creates your weekly payroll. And then from there, Intuit can push that data elsewhere into things like Jobber, Constant Contact, et cetera, and so forth. So looking at what else is kind of available on the market now, you look at, we have a pretty flexible integration here. We can do sales by particular line item, meaning on a product level, we can pass over every single product that you sell. We do sales by category. So if example, you wanted to see how much alcohol you're selling versus food, we can do that. And of course, the integration we've had for the longest is going to be our sales by summary, which is just a breakdown of taxable versus non-taxable sales. You'll notice we also pass employee hours, inventory actions, including cost of goods sold and bills from purchase orders. And additionally, we do integrate customers. Now, just a note about integration of customers, we don't actually manipulate those customers after our initial sync, though we do allow you to consistently import your customer list from QuickBooks through one of our wizards. So we can get into integration types. As I mentioned before, summary was our first. Then about a year ago, we released summary by class. And then about 6 months back, there was summary by product. So the difference in each of these integration types is going to specifically be the length of the invoice. So in a summary invoice in QuickBooks, you would see taxable sales, non-taxable sales, and then gift cards, taxes, any of those liabilities and sales that come through, but it would be broad strokes. It would be just that taxable sales and non-taxable sales. Now, if you wanted to get more granular than that, we can go into summary by class, which would allow you to push your reporting classes from Revel into your accounting. So whether you're looking at your sales summary on Revel or you're looking at your P&L on QuickBooks, it's all the same language, it's all the same verbiage, and it jives. Then, of course, we can also go summary by product if it's absolutely necessary. If you need to know exactly how many bottles of milk you sell in a day, we can absolutely do that. And we would break down the invoice based on every individual product that was sold. All right, so to set up our QuickBooks integration, everything is tied to your Intuit QuickBooks login. So on the Revel dashboard, you would navigate to the QuickBooks screen, which you have in front of you here. You'd select which checkboxes you're interested in integrating, and then click Connect to QuickBooks. From there, we'll reach out to Intuit, confirm your identity, and then integrate the two systems by authenticating Revel. Now, when you have that first sync, we create a number of things. We create the accounts that are necessary for us to push in the information every single day. We also allow you to map those accounts. So if, for example, you have a legacy inventory asset account that you've been using for years and you want to continue to use that, we can absolutely map to that account. We also create items on the item list. So this is everything from a taxable sales item to a tax item to a service item. And so if you look at the item list, you'll see that grow in length based on what you've entered into Revel, and then also based on what your actual integration type is. As I mentioned before, we will only create the things that we need to perpetuate the integration. So if you integrate with a summary level, then what happens is we create taxable sales, non-taxable sales, gift cards, taxes, all of those items so that we can pass under those item names into QuickBooks. Payment methods and vendors are the same. Same sort of situation. We create a payment method for Visa and cash and trade if necessary, and we have several customizable payment types within Revel that can then jive over to QuickBooks. Vendors, we create or match a vendor for everything that's in Revel. So if all of your naming conventions are absolutely the same, down to spaces and capitalization and spelling, obviously, we will match those vendors if they exist in QuickBooks. And if they don't exist in QuickBooks, we will create those so that we can pass the bills from purchase orders into those vendors. Employees are created only if you're using the payroll function. If it's necessary, we will create those employees based on the employees that are entered into Revel. And then the remainder of that setup for those employees would have to be done in QuickBooks as due to things like tax ID or address. We don't have those fields in Revel, so you can set them up in Revel, and we will pass them to QuickBooks. There will need to be some cleanup on the QuickBooks side there. So here's an example of some of the accounts that we create in QuickBooks. You'll notice that the accounts that have the asterisks, those are specifically for QuickBooks desktop integration. The remainder ring true for both. And as I mentioned before, we can map these accounts to any existing chart of accounts if necessary. And there are several articles available on the help site which outline how to do that. Here are the items that we create in QuickBooks on the item list, as I mentioned. We have taxable sales, non-taxable sales, taxable service fees, non-taxable service fees, and then surcharge, gift card, item, and order discount. List continues if you accept coupons, if you have a rounding delta, if you use invoices. All of these are stock setup for the QuickBooks integration. These types and accounts are a required configuration, so that's also available on our help site, which is available from when you're mapping these accounts. Payment methods created. This is, again, kind of the base that we have to create to perpetuate what Revel is pushing into QuickBooks. Everything's pretty self-explanatory here. Cash goes to cash, check goes to check, Visa goes to Visa. Notice down here, some of these are passed as other type. That's because the system doesn't have a specific tender. So if you have several things like PayPal, or if you use Credit Plus, or if you use a customizable payment type, that would all fall under other until you denote in the system what that other payment actually is and how it should be handled. So let's take a minute and talk about the daily sync to QuickBooks. Our QuickBooks integration is set to sync one time a day, every single day. And what that means is that 3 a.m. Is generally the time that our clients pick. Prior to business hours, everything is closed, everything is settled. We create one invoice and the requisite payments every single day. So this slide mentions payment summary mode. Our default for this is payment summary. If you have an invoice and then you get one payment for each type. So if you have cash payments, Visa payments, Amex, and MasterCard all on one day, you would see 4 payments that are the total of each type. If you have a refund, the way that Revel handles it is we pass over the full amount, including the refunded amount, and then use credit memos to decrease the actual amount that you accepted. You'll notice some of this varies. For example, in this case, this occurs in QuickBooks Desktop, whereas in QuickBooks Online, we have what's called a refund receipt. So we're allowed to use a refund receipt rather than a credit memo there. Now, one of the major value adds of the Revel integration with QuickBooks is we offer payment reconciliation mode. So that would mean that for every swipe of the credit card, you would see a payment in QuickBooks. Each of those payments passes a transaction ID, which we're going to discuss a little bit later in the webinar here. But basically, we will do our best to reconcile or assist you in reconciling as a result of payment reconciliation mode. That's the major difference there. As far as inventory syncing goes, we do 1 bill per day for all manual inventory receipts. So if you upload a bunch of inventory at the very beginning, you'll see a bill under POS default vendor or QB POS vendor. And that's us accounting for the bills that you've created that aren't tied to a vendor. Now, if you use a purchase order, that will push a bill into the corresponding vendor. So if you have all of your vendors loaded, every time you receive a purchase order in Revel and finalize that you've received all of that, that can then be pushed into QuickBooks so that it can be paid by the accounting department. The inventory actions that we use are all performed by journal entries outside of the bills. We would have 1 journal entry each day per action. So use, damage, adjust, waste. Each of those categories would have a journal entry that outlined all of that each time that action was used throughout that day. So if you used each of those, you'd expect 4 journal entries, each siloed by type. So one would be use, one would be damage, one would be adjust, and one would be transfer out or waste. We have items that are tracked in inventory, have cost sent to inventory asset account. Items that are not tracked in inventory have cost sent to cost of goods account. These are all still journal entries that would take place every single day. RMAs now sync as well. So you can create vendor credits by creating an RMA in Revel. That would pass over to QuickBooks, again, to the corresponding vendor when once created and finalized. So the only thing on this screen here that is not subject to the once a day rule of our sync is the employee syncing. If you create an employee in Revel, usually within 2 hours, we'll have refreshed that and added that to the employee list in QuickBooks. But outside of that, everything else syncs 1 time a day. So we talked about this briefly earlier. Class mapping can be used for multi-location tracking. It can be used for multi-departmental tracking. You could split by revenue centers. And where this comes in handy is if you have separate income accounts for each business line. If you have an income account for your beer and wine versus your hard alcohol versus your food, we can split those sales into any of those accounts and in any number of directions necessary. That's done, again, through the item list. By changing the income account on the specific items that we create, we can pay into those accounts every single time automatically. So once you do the initial setup and you make these decisions, you can expect that then your integration would sync into those accounts daily. So we have a new house account system that we're using now. This was our old house account system. What this shows your balance on the left and then some check boxes of is it billed or is it paid. So our new system looks like this. It's much more robust. You can expand all of the orders. You can look at exactly what the items were, and this would all be attached under customers. This passes into QuickBooks as well, though when this passes into QuickBooks, Revel serves to be the brain for this. you're going to see a lump sum pass over of all payments against house accounts and then all charges against house accounts. So you wouldn't see, for example, Kevin specifically attached to any house account information in QuickBooks. You'd have the liability on your books, but you would need to view Revel to get the granular details or send statements and then collect money on those accounts. So notice here, you can make adjustments and payments. On the top right here, that'd be an adjustment. And then on the bottom here, this would be accepting of a payment. So you would be able to mark a payment on the dashboard from here. Say someone mailed in a check, you could mark that from the management console. If you're looking to use a credit card or a debit card to pay against a house account, that would need to come from the POS. This is an example of the statement that we would email to a customer. You have the starting balance, obviously any charges, any payments, adjustments, and then the amount due. And then these order numbers here would track back to Revel, and you would be able to search for that order number if necessary, if there happened to be a dispute. So to get back to payment reconciliation, this is the transaction ID number, which I referenced earlier. So the transaction ID number would come over with every single individual payment, and it would go into the reference number field. Now, if you view Revel, that same ID number is available in all of the payments. Now, I should say this portion of the integration will only work if you have Intuit Payments as your payment processor. And the way that this works is we pass the transaction ID number to Intuit when they process your account, or your transactions, I'm sorry. So when they capture those transactions and they put it into a batch, they include all of these transaction ID numbers. So when the batch drops in your bank, these payments then automatically create a match on the bank feed. So you can go through and review the bank feed and approve the matches, and your payments are then reconciled. Now, additionally here, we can change your batch time with Intuit now. This is a new feature in 2.22, which allows us to change what time Intuit grabs the batch. So if this is causing an issue, we can change that by changing the day start time, and that generally aligns things and moves them along. So I wanted to talk about a couple of the pitfalls or more confusing things when people set up their integration. You must have a tax set up on both platforms. You will set up a tax in Revel. If you don't set up a tax in QuickBooks, we will actually stop your QuickBooks sync and email you and let you know you're not correctly accounting for your tax, so we're going to pause your integration. And once you have a tax set up, we'll be able to restart it and restore all of that data. Now, this is just so that Intuit in QuickBooks actually knows what to do with the numbers. If you're accepting a 10% tax and you don't have tax turned on, it just appears that you have 10% over what your invoices are, and it looks like there's something wrong. The fact is, QuickBooks doesn't know what to do with the extra 10% because there's not a line item and there's not sales tax turned on. So make sure that you have taxes set up on both platforms and that they are the same amount. We do have some documentation that recommends you make the percentage on the QuickBooks side 0%. That's fine because Revel overrides the tax calculation and places the amount that you have accepted into that window. So the number that is next to my POS sales tax here is just specifically for note when viewing the invoice. It's not actually the amount that's being collected against the invoice.
Very cool. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah.
So we do have some questions. We're going to try to get through them right now. I'm going to read them out to Andrew, and if he can't answer it right off the bat, then I'm going to ask you guys to email us So that email that I was talking about, if you do have questions specific to this webinar, if you have QuickBooks related questions, please don't email that in terms of support to the training email. But again, if you have any questions as it relates to this particular webinar, the email you can use is simply training@revelsystems.com. And we'll do our best to get back to you regarding any questions that may have come up through Andrew's presentation today. So let's jump into the questions that have come in thus far. So the first one we have is, we use locations or stores in QBO. Is it possible to integrate our Revel to a specific location? Because we actually have 4 different stores, but only 2 use Revel.
Yeah, absolutely. To accomplish that, you would need to there are a number of ways you can do it. If you want to put both of those stores into the same QuickBooks file, it's just simply logging into both Revel establishments using those same Intuit credentials. And then check the box for location tracking, and then we'll use the same location tracking that you've already built in your QuickBooks. Now, if you wanted to go into 2 separate files, you would put the establishments in establishment groups and then integrate your files separately, which our support is well versed in and can certainly help with.
Excellent. Next question is, how does the integration work if payments are accepted from multiple establishments?
So if you have multiple establishments who are currently integrated, you would have an invoice for each establishment, and then that invoice would have all the payments applied to it. So everything would be siloed by establishment. If you were processing on the same merchant ID, if you're processing on the same merchant ID for all of the stores, the reconciliation may not be as clean as hoped, because you have 3 differing sources for that merchant account. But other than that, I mean, that's the only problem that I've seen people run into. Realistically, you get one invoice and you get all of those payments that pay the invoice back to 0, and those should track back to your bank fee and the money that's actually being received.
Okay. I started using Revel a few weeks ago. Am I able to have Revel sync the past couple of weeks into my QBO and then begin daily sync?
Unfortunately, because of the way that the sync is built, we create basically what is called an initial sync entry. So we aggregate all of your data from your beginning of Revel until this point and push that into QuickBooks. So if we integrated you and then backdated to push in that data, we would A, risk duplication, or B, risk that calculation which we've made to set you up for success is then wrong. So it's not something that would be recommended.
Okay. I'm using QuickBooks Online and Connected. QBO is matching my daily sales and coding it to QBPOS customer, and sometimes it's not. Why, and should it be coded to this QBPOS customer?
QBPOS customer is the name of the customer which we pay under for everything. Every account that we create or item that we create will have POS in front of it. And to silo what we're doing from the rest of your business, we use QBPOS customer, so then you know everything that comes in should be coded to QBPOS customer.
Okay.
And in QuickBooks Desktop, that same customer is POS default customer. They have different names for the different platforms, but it's the same exact concept.
Okay. Let me know if you need a little more clarification on this one. But this question is, would you use Revel to receive payment on an account and then record them to QuickBooks? Does that make sense, or do we need a little more clarification? All right, so Eunice, if you don't mind providing a little more clarification on the question while we're still in session, we'll be able to get to it a little later. We're a bit confused and don't know how to answer that. Next question we have is, for our credit cards, they are automatically moved onto a holding account that we determined. For some reason, we can only move this money to undeposited funds, and we have to make a transfer to the credit card holding account. Is there any way to make our specific cards move into the holding account?
No, the integration is currently built so that all credit cards hit undeposited funds until they're reconciled against the bank. So you would have to reconcile them against the bank and then transfer, but I understand it's going into a holding account, so that would be like pre-reconciliation generally. So the short answer to that is no, we have to hit undeposited funds every time, and that's just because of how the integration is built.
And also, do you know if there are any experts that clients can hire in order to help with integrations?
I've done a fair amount of work with Pro Advisors. We have a number of Revel resellers who also are QuickBooks Pro Advisors. Those are generally the best experts that I've found for hire, at least. And they generally are well versed in both sides if they're a reseller of Revel and can assist in that.
Is there any way that is there an email or anything like that they could reach out to? Do you know? Or is it best to maybe reach out to our sales?
Yeah, I mean, you can reach out to our sales, and if there's someone in support we can set you up with, we can do that. Additionally, Intuit would have any information on their website about Pro Advisors. That's a program which they run.
Perfect. Okay, so Dan, my recommendation would be to go on the Intuit website and take a look at the section that has the information about Pro Advisors there so that you can connect with one and see if what they do could fit your needs. All right. Which database do house account payments get posted to? Revel, QBO, or either one?
Both. So the workflow would look like this. You would allow someone to leave the store with money on with liability on a house account. That would push to Revel, which would then in turn push that to QuickBooks overnight. So you'd have the lump sum of the total liability increase and the total liability decrease for house accounts on that day. Then when you posted the payment as far as paying off that liability, that would have to come in through Revel so that Revel then creates the requisite actions which would then clear the payment or the liability that's on your books.
All right. Can Revel customer data be mapped into QBO as customers are added to Revel?
At this time, no.
All right.
And that's largely because we don't manipulate those customers. We pay everything under QBPOS customer. There's conversation that the integration may move to that level. However, I can't make any promises about that and where that's headed.
How does payment method trade work?
There's a setting that's in the newest release of Revel on the dashboard, and you would have to make sure that that's enabled. Now, the trade is focused on the sale, not the income of goods. So I know several of our customers who use the trade function to close their order and then create a purchase order in Revel or manually receive what they're taking in as trade at that value. That would create both the income of goods and the outgoing goods in the order.
Excellent.
That's a feature that we're working to develop currently, and that's why I mentioned the newest release will have that in the back end of Revel.
Great. Last question seems right now. I have not previously used class mapping. Can I start using it now and have it be retroactive to the beginning of my year?
Do you use QuickBooks or QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Desktop?
So Greg, if you want to let us know which one you use, we can answer that. Just for educational purposes, if it is QuickBooks Online, is that possible?
It is possible. So when you move, when you change the income account on the class that Revel has created, there is a checkbox below where you change that class that says, would you like to change these transactions historically? So anything that Revel has put there will move. But this is tied to the specific item. So for example, if up until now you've had taxable sales pushed in, and you want to switch to beer, wine, food, and carry out, that's not going to connect because taxable sales is a different item in QuickBooks eyes than food would be. We would have to create a new set of line items when you make the switch to class mapping, and from that point forward, it would show. But if you're integrated currently with a summary or with a product type, it won't mesh.
All right. One other quick question, follow-up question from the trade question. Mm-hmm. Does the trade payment account for sales tax?
I'd have to look into that.
Okay.
It's still a developing function.
Okay. So what I will say, Linda, if you want to go ahead and email training@revelsystems.com, with that particular question, we can see if we can talk to someone here and look into it and get you an answer for that. Otherwise, it looks like that's all for questions unless anything else comes in last minute. I do want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. We do record all of our webinars and post them on our online Revel University. So if you guys are interested in that, the website is just revelsystems.com/Revel-University. Check it out. Lots of great information there specifically on Revel. And of course, if you guys need to reference this particular webinar, we will go ahead and post that a little bit later this week, if not early next week. So definitely check that out. Just to be incredibly, just to make sure that you guys essentially have all the information you need, please again, email training@revelsystems.com if you have any other questions that pop up regarding this webinar. Otherwise, if you have any specific QuickBooks questions, please go ahead and talk to QuickBooks support, see if they have anything for you. Check out their website as well. There's going to be a lot of information that you can use there. Otherwise, I think that's it. No other questions have come up, and it was lovely having you as an audience. And thank you so much for participating and asking so many questions. I'm sure that if it wasn't a question that someone else thought to ask, that people benefited from it anyway. So we really appreciate you guys, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.